Welcome to another edition of the Expanding on Consciousness podcast. I am Mark Serto, and today we will be continuing the interview I did with author Tom Campbell, where we discuss his theory of everything, his big toe. A physicist's eye view of the nature of reality and how consciousness is interacting with it. Human activity always begins with consciousness, and we use it in ways which continually change the world in the most mundane circumstances. We invent all sorts of things which literally can change the landscape of the earth. We've done this throughout our entire history, and we do it more so as we move into our future. Many of these advancements, technological advancements, have an impact on the earth in ways that no other species has ever managed before. This is what humans do, and we've done it since the dawn of civilization. Another thing that makes human consciousness so interesting and unique on our planet is we have the ability to contemplate our own existence. But Tom's theory, which is shared by others of his ilk in the realm of quantum physics, is telling us that something else is occurring with human consciousness. That just our thoughts and emotions, the stuff of this thing that we call consciousness on a personal level, is having a subtle effect on the molecular structure of reality itself, physical reality. Furthermore, we're coming to an understanding that our consciousness is not so personal as it is multidimensional, meaning that what we think are our own thoughts being generated through our own brains as we interact with and adapt to our environment is actually originating from a source that seems to be outside of the body. That sounds very mystical, but it does have a basis in theoretical physics, which is new and, for some, kind of startling. For those of you who are listening, who are of a mystical mindset, you find this notion completely fascinating and you're not at all disturbed. That's great. Perhaps you're even encouraged to discover what that truly means and the mechanisms behind this phenomenon, such as Tom and others. I'm inspired by it. Personally, I encourage that exploration and the curiosity. I want to know certain things. There are many wonderful benefits for those who are willing to take the journey of exploring altered states of consciousness to discover the truth of being. That's how Tom and others come to such revelations like the ones that you're hearing. And you will too, should you decide to look deeply down the rabbit hole of this thing that we call consciousness. Personally, I've been exploring altered states of consciousness through meditation for most of my life, and I'm no stranger to these types of experiences. If I may take a moment to offer a slice of personal philosophy regarding exploring consciousness in this way through altered states, I'd like to share some ideas which many of you may already be familiar with, but bear with me. First, to quote Shakespeare, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." This famous line from Hamlet speaks to the mystery of consciousness. It also speaks to the arrogance of thinking that we all know what we're speaking of when we discuss it. I'm not saying that any of our guests, including Tom or myself, are doing this, of course, being arrogant. Theories are very important, and they should be assessed and discussed, and if possible, validated through peer review. Science is a very important part of this discussion. But so is mysticism, and that's why this podcast exists. The more we listen to each other, the further we can come towards the truth and understanding of this thing called consciousness. In my humble opinion, no thoughts regarding consciousness are too lofty. Consciousness is still a mystery to be solved, and the deeper we go into this inner space, the more we humans can find out about ourselves. After all, we're reaching for alien shores here. Secondly, I'm very enamored with a quote by author Joseph Campbell, which states, "The psychotic drowns in the same waters in which the mystic swims." This idea echoes an old story from the Talmud in which 4 rabbis go in search of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden being a metaphor for enlightened consciousness, or, in another word, truth. In the story, each of the rabbis find the garden, but it's not without a price. One rabbi loses his faith, another loses his life, another loses his mind, and only one finds his thing called enlightenment. The moral of the story is balance, which is my personal mantra. Exploring the depths of consciousness can be fruitful, fateful, or somewhere in between. In my humble opinion, it all depends on the willingness of the explorer to reach far, study with diligence and intention, and to learn from those who are of serious minds and open hearts. Each of our guests have such hearts and minds, and are in keeping with the Monroe Institute's long-standing tradition of inquiry. Balance is the key to keeping one foot in each world, or in the case of Tom Campbell, a toe in each world. Here's part 3 of my interview with this extraordinary explorer. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, which leads me to where you are now in your work. I want to cover your new book and how you're using consciousness with this model. But before I do that, I have to ask you a burning question. I have at least 100 questions, but I have one for you that I think will bring us to the next phase of this interview, which is, in this model, how are you defining this thing called consciousness?
Well, I define consciousness as awareness with a choice. That's consciousness. Just awareness with a choice.
Awareness with a choice. So you don't see consciousness as being, my impression of your understanding of how the universe worked was that consciousness was something on a personal level and an impersonal level, something which we are interacting with. Joseph Campbell referred to consciousness as a sea in which we swim. Yeah. The mystics have talked about it in such a way. The ego consciousness that so many people are, in spiritual pursuits are paying attention to now, whereas, 100 years ago they didn't care. Now they're paying attention. How is my ego working? How is my ego formed? It was formed in much the same way that you're talking about, from, to use the Latin phrase, ex nihilo, out of nothing. You came into this world with a clear slate, a beginner's mind, to use the Buddhist construct, and you're starting off and you're creating yourself based on an information loop with the subject-object split, that world which you're interacting with, which may as well be a virtual world for you for all intents and purposes, because you haven't really developed a concept of what reality is at ages 2, 3. You start developing this personality style, and we call it an ego. So how are you, within this model, defining this word called consciousness? I've heard awareness with
choice. Awareness with choice. And, of course, any choice that's really a choice is a free will choice.
It is.
Because if you don't have free will, then you don't have choice.
That's correct.
By definition, if it's got a choice, it's a free will choice. I would call, if we want to talk about or describe consciousness, I just call it the source.
Right.
It's the source out of which all else goes. It's a system.
But are you speaking of human consciousness, or like plant consciousness or insect consciousness?
Okay.
Because you're talking about, a different level of, how shall I call it, level of sophistication. There is no I, thou in plant consciousness as far as we can tell. One tree doesn't know it's any different from another tree. There's a very unity flavor in their consciousness. Same with insects. There is perhaps a queen bee and then a bunch of drones, who really don't have free will. They just act in a society that's very homogeneous and harmonious and working together, speaking to the cooperation that you were talking about before.
Okay, I can answer all those very easily. Consciousness, is the source. We have all these individuated units of consciousness, and some of those are human, some of those are dogs and cats, some of those are bumblebees, or some of those are mosquitoes. And all of them are basically doing the same thing. They have consciousness. Consciousness comes in all various levels of capacity.
Right.
Right. So you have a consciousness with a lot of capacity, plays an avatar with a lot of capacity.
Right.
You have a consciousness with very little capacity, it plays an avatar with very little capacity. Okay. Now, at some point, the larger consciousness system, which is the source, can play things as NPCs, non-player characters, if it wishes.
Okay.
And in the beginning, when this virtual reality was first made, it was playing all the characters.
Okay.
All the characters were just...
There was no individuation, so to speak, right?
All the players were being played. Yeah,
Right.
They were individual characters interacting with each other, making choices, but it was all done
by one player.
with NPCs, all done by one mind, right?
Okay, yeah.
So then when IUOC started logging on, individuated units of consciousness started logging on, then they had the free will to make those choices. Okay, now they're not NPCs. But as that happened, the system said, okay, you, George, you're going to log on here. You take this one.
Right.
And Harry, you take that one. So eventually the system backs out of those because those are interesting and people can learn from them. So now they're being played by pieces of consciousness with their own free will. Okay, now if you have the mosquitoes, let's say, it's a little different thing. There's not going to be a lot of growth there, but there'll be some. The mosquito, well, let me back up and let's start another place. Consciousness requires a choice. So in as much as there are choices, then there's consciousness. If there are no choices, if it's all hardwired, let's say that the trees don't make any real choices. Everything's hardwired. It's all just biology. It's all action-reaction. Stimulus response is the whole thing. Nothing else is going on there. Well, then that's hardwired. There are no choices. There is no consciousness. So,
well, that's an assumption, right? Because a tree did adapt to what it became based on its need for growth and growth potential.
But that doesn't require choice.
No, you're correct. It doesn't require choice, but it was an adaptation.
Yeah, you can adapt things that.
Or at least choices, we know it, right?
Yeah, well, things that can adapt doesn't require consciousness to adapt. Your computer will adapt to the mistakes you make, where it'll give you suggestions and things based on your mistakes. Computers can adapt, but they're not conscious.
Okay.
And things can adapt just because their biology makes them adaptable. They're still evolving. They can change, but that's all hardwired. And randomness, there's randomness in there. And when you have a random event, then that event is maybe more or less survivable or more or less able to, deal with its environment. So the ones that are more able go on, the ones that are less able go away.
Right.
So that adapting is just part of what things do. So if it actually makes a choice, that is a free will choice. Okay, then it's conscious. So if a tree makes a free will choice, then I'd say a tree has consciousness. If it doesn't, if it's all hardwired, even though it adapts, it doesn't have consciousness.
Okay, so insects not really consciousness. They just kind of do their thing based on the hardwiring.
It's evolution. They're just hardwiring. They're here and they get a stimulus, they respond. The sun shines over here, so they move their little flowers around to get more sun. Yeah. Because that's what they do.
Okay.
So anyhow, that then says your rocks aren't consciousness. Everything's not conscious. It's only those things that make choices. Now, whether or not, let's say, a tree is conscious or not depends on us knowing that. Now, we know now that trees seem to have a pretty rich life underground with their roots and root systems and with fungi and bacteria and all sorts of other things. Bigger trees will reach out to a smaller tree that's having trouble and give them nutrients. And, well, is that just rule set stuff or is that awareness? I'd say we don't really know yet. A clam, if you touch a clam's foot, it'll jerk its foot in. Is that conscious choice or is that just hardwired?
It's ticklish.
Probably hardwired, but maybe not. You don't know. So there's a whole set of things that you just say, I don't know whether they're conscious or not. But until we can derive some sort of test to see whether they're making choices outside of what their biology determines, then we can say that if they do that, now they're conscious. Now, every consciousness has a what I call decision space.
Mm-hmm.
The decision space is basically the number of choices that it knows about, the number of choices it can make,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the number of choices there are,
Mm-hmm.
because you may think you have only 2 choices, but there really may be 10 or 20 that you have. You just only can think of 2 of them.
Yeah.
So then your decision space is 2. You see, if you can only think. So it's a number of the choices that you are aware of.
Mm-hmm.
That's your decision space. That's the space in which you can make choices
Mm-hmm.
and change things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, as you evolve the quality of your consciousness, or as you lower the entropy of your consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
your decision space grows.
Right.
You get more and more information. You get more and more things that you can, more choices that you
Right.
can make.
Absolutely.
Before your things were. So it comes in all sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Capacities change. The capacity of your consciousness will change as you evolve the quality of your consciousness, as you lower your entropy.
That's
so
very
it's
true.
it's kind of a fluid thing. So you look at a bumblebee. Now, I would say for a lot of insects are probably running mostly on automatic. It's probably mostly hardwired. But I have a personal story of a bumblebee that told me that this bumblebee was making intentional choices.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's true, there's probably a lot of other little creatures like that making intentional choices,
Mm-hmm.
which means it's doing the same thing we are. Within its range, within its decision space
Mm-hmm.
of intentional choices,
Right.
it can make good choices or bad choices.
Right.
And by those choices, it evolves or de-evolves its consciousness.
Mm-hmm. So
And
let's talk about
that's the same thing that we're doing.
Let's talk about that. When we met before, we were doing the panel for the Path 11 production of Beyond the Physical, which you were prominently in. And you spoke quite elegantly about love as opposed to fear. And the basic message I thought you were presenting was that we're creating reality based on fear instead of love. Do you see love and fear as being primal dualities? Are they forms of consciousness, simple emotions? Why the emphasis on the choice point of love and fear?
Love and fear both exist because we have free will.
Right.
We get to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
If those choices lower entropy in the long term,
Mm-hmm.
well, that goes to the love side. That's positive.
Right.
If those choices raise entropy in the long term, then that's not good. That's bad. So that defines good and evil, or right and wrong, good and bad.
Right.
Depends on how it affects the entropy of the system, not just of the individual, but of the system. So the whole system is evolving, trying to lower entropy, right? If it raises its entropy to a point, the system dies. All the bits are random.
Right.
So it's just a natural system. It's not an unnatural system. It's not infinite. It's not perfect. It's just a natural system evolving, doing the best it can to move into more productive states and keep lowering its entropy, because that's the pressure it has that evolution is pushing on us. Lower your entropy. And just like us, survive and procreate or die, become extinct. Well, it's got the same thing. Lower your entropy or you'll de-evolve and die. So it's just a natural system. Okay, now that natural system, as we saw, needed these virtual machines in order to create more possibilities for it to evolve into. Then it needed a virtual reality we call the physical universe in order to have more meaningful interactions that had more decisions that relate to ethical, moral, doing, lowering entropy or raising entropy.
Right.
So it all boils down to, if you do things that lower entropy, those are good things. And that's on the love side. The fear is what happens when you have a lot of entropy. You're a consciousness. Now, this consciousness takes with it, when this avatar is dead, well, this avatar just is gone. Just like in World of Warcraft, your avatar dies.
Right.
So you get a new one. And when you get a new one, what you take with you is your consciousness quality, what you've learned, your level of entropy that you've gotten to, what you've earned through your good choices. So you start with that level of entropy, but you don't start with any intellectual part, just the quality part. The intellectual part you have to redo from infant onward is the intellectual part. But you come in with the quality part. That way the whole boat is slowly lifted as you evolve. If you make good choices that are to the love side, to the caring and cooperation side, helpful side, then, the side of kindness, then you evolve. Your entropy is lower. You're part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And you're talking about an afterlife, the spirit that survives.
It's not a spirit that survives. It's what you've always been. You're a piece of consciousness, and you're playing a virtual reality. When your avatar drops dead, it's not that you survived it. You've always been a piece of consciousness. You're just an individuated piece of consciousness, and your player just got killed or died of a disease or got run over by a truck.
So you're not talking about an entropy of the soul then?
No, I'm talking about entropy in two places. One is in the individuated unit of consciousness, which is who we really are.
Which is awareness with choice.
Yeah, it's a piece of the larger consciousness system. Okay. It's awareness with choice, and it evolves and understands more and more. The way it evolves is by lowering its entropy. And it keeps that lower entropy when it logs back on to another avatar. It starts with the entropy that it's already gained.
Are you using that as a metaphor for the concept of reincarnation, moving from life to life then?
Yeah. Okay. I'd say reincarnation is a metaphor for
something more oriented towards computer science. Got it. You got it. Yeah. But the concept is really a philosophical notion of personal growth from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime.
Yeah, but see, mine is not a philosophical notion at all. Mine is basically a logical derivation. This model is a scientific model. Mm-hmm. It's a model based on evolution, just like Darwin's model, but Darwin's model is also scientific. We learn from it. We see that dolphins have hand bounds like this in their flippers,
right.
And we understand they were on land once,
right,
and that sort of thing. So,
I don't mean to diminish your theory as being
no, I don't mean that. I just mean that it's a logical model such that I don't come to things because I think they're good ideas. It's not that I think love is the answer sounds really great and it's a good place to go.
All you need is love, right?
Yeah. It's everything in my model is there because it's logically necessary to be there. But the model couldn't add that if it wasn't logically necessary. So this reincarnation is not philosophical. It's a logical necessity of the model. Otherwise, the model doesn't work. So it's a logical component of this larger system that has to be there, just like the Akashic records have to be there because the virtual reality engine, rendering engine needs to have that information available.
Well, thinking
all of these things are logically required for the overall consistency of the model. And the model is just a very bare bones thing. I don't have anything in it that isn't logically required to be there. So yes, you can call the individuated unit of consciousness the soul, if you like. You can do that. You can call the larger conscious system God, if you like.
Sure. Right.
You can do you can make those metaphors, but basically my system is metaphorical itself. The larger conscious system is a metaphor for source. I use the computer metaphors because they're more accessible and understandable to people today than a guy on a chariot fighting a war.
Right.
That's poetry. That can be interpreted many ways. Mine cannot be interpreted in many ways. Mine is entirely a logical model that can only be interpreted the way it is.
I love the model, and I love the logic involved in it, and yet it all sounds very philosophical and spiritual, and that could be through my lens because I've been studying philosophy and spirituality forever.
It supports all that stuff.
It does. It does. Right.
When somebody says, "Well, where does God come from?" Well, this answers that.
Right.
See, it's a model. It's consciousness. It's the consciousness system, and are we? Is idealism true? Are we all just one? Yes, and this answers that. Yes, we all have to be one. Otherwise, the system the logical system doesn't work. It has to be that way.
And then, of course, before we existed, existence existed. So, and it was evolving. So,
yes.
It's kind of anthropomorphic or anthrocentric in order to say, it's because of human consciousness that reality exists at all, or that we're playing, because there has to be a larger consciousness.
Because consciousness, there has to be a larger consciousness system. Right. Yeah, and consciousness system needed human avatars for its consciousness to play in order to have choices that were really meaningful so it could grow up.
Right.
So that's how.
And the mystics would say, that's God separating from itself in order for it to become known.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So I had people, I give a lot of talks, and I've had people come up and say, Tom, have you been studying Tibetan Buddhism? Because I've been in Tibetan Buddhism for the last 2 decades, and what you're saying is exactly what the Tibetan Buddhists said.
Right.
And I've had the same thing about almost every mystical school. You're a Buddhist, you're Shinto, you're
but you're like, no, I'm just a physicist who figured this out logically, right?
And I'm like, even the shaman,
right?
I've had shaman come to my thing, and they say, oh, this is exactly what we shaman do, and it builds a logical foundation under all those spiritual understandings. See, the Buddha said, this reality is an illusion. All right, now that's sort of poetry. What did he mean by that? It's an illusion.
Right.
And people can debate that, but I say it's a virtual reality, and that's real clear because that's something that's computed in a computer, and so it gives the logical content as a foundation underneath all those things. Why does the placebo effect work?
Why?
Well, it works because that's our feedback. We can modify future probability with our intent. That's how healing works.
Right.
How does remote viewing work? Well, you're just getting data out of a database.
Sure. Yeah.
That's how remote viewing works.
Right.
How about telepathy? Well, all consciousness is netted.
Right.
Every piece of consciousness is on the net. So
how did Jesus heal the blind man? Because he saw him as whole, or saw him as whole in another reality system, or whatever. I mean, there are lots of potentials there. But as a physicist, I'm wondering, in your theory, like I read people like Michio Kaku and Brian Greene and all these other physicists who have a theory about how all of creation began, and they have all these wonderful hieroglyphics that they put on the blackboard that goes for miles and goes way over my head. My question to you as a physicist is, in your theory, have you ever created like a mathematical proof model for these other guys to say, yeah, I get it, and they walk into this mystical world that the mystics have been talking about, but from the lens of a physicist? Because I know that a great deal of your audience relates to what you're saying based on, the same lens that I have. We have an interest of that, and it's more of a spiritual or philosophical perspective than it is a physics perspective. And people like you, you guys who worked for NASA, you loom large in my thinking. You took us from a run in the jungle to a walk in space. So science is key in my world, but I've never, I'm not so materialistic either. So that's basically my question. Have you worked with other physicists and created some kind of mathematical model that they can all get behind and say, yeah, this is a problem that we can all work on together and solve?
I have done something along that line, but it's not work with other physicists and do a mathematical model. Science is not fundamentally mathematical. Science is fundamentally logical.
Yeah.
For instance, Darwin's theory of evolution, plus all the things we've added to Darwin's theory, in the last 2 centuries. But all of that is not a mathematical model, and there's a little bit of statistics and probability in it, but it's basically just logical. Just makes sense.
Observation.
Why does that fin have finger bones in it?
Exactly.
And it's just observation and figuring things out and making them match. So my model is like that. It's an evolutionary model. It's not predominantly a mathematical model.
I see.
It's a model based on logic. But what my books, the MBT trilogy, that I made specifically as an on-ramp for left brain science and, logical thinkers.
Right.
It is, if you read it, it's after you get past this first section, which is just the story about how it all started. That's just a story. But from then on, it's logical, and it's just like a textbook in mathematics. You won't understand this part until you've read this part. It all builds in a logical process.
Right.
And I've made it to be an on-ramp for all the logical process people, because they don't have an on-ramp. The mystics, you can go to your bookshelf and there's 100 books there that you have to interpret, the poetry.
Right.
And if you've been there, then it's easy to see just what they meant. And if you haven't been there, it's totally nonsense. You don't get it at all.
Right. There's no science there.
Yeah. Right. But for the left brainers who need logical process, they will pick up the Bhagavad Gita and get the guy on the chariots, talking about fighting his war, and get in after about 10 minutes, they'll throw that book away because, there's nothing there. There's no meat. Where's the meat? It's just all this poetry and stuff that you can interpret any which way you want to. And there's no science to it, no logic. So the MBT, books are an on-ramp just for logical process people. And they tend to be a little hard to read for the right-brainers. They have a hard time with it because it is dense with logical process. And the right-brainers don't need logical process. They just intuit. They intuit the answer. They know that, they get to the end. It's like, well, did you need all of that to get there? I got there, before you started. Yes, that's the right brain. But
why is it you're writing books? I should be writing books.
I am extremely right-brained and extremely left-brained, both at the same time. So I've developed both of those sides much more than most people develop them.
Right.
But that's good. You need balance.
Oh, yeah.
For that.
Absolutely.
So you really need to be balanced. So those books are the on-ramp that you're talking about. So people who are rational, who like science, who want to have logical process, or they're not going to read the next sentence. If it doesn't make logical sense, then those books will make logical sense. And it will lead them to the mystical result. They'll follow their logic and end up in a mystical space, because that's where logic actually takes you.
Shh. Don't tell anybody. We don't want to scare them off beforehand. I love you for doing that. I really do. I mean, like I said, guys like of your intellect, you've taken us from a run in the jungle to a walk in space. So being able to draw folks into the conversation of what is consciousness, how does it work, how is it interacting, what is the true nature of the multidimensional level of consciousness, these are important questions that I think need to be removed from just the mystical part. That's why this podcast focuses on the science and the mysticism. Nobody's left out of this conversation. I love what you're doing, and I do. And I'm just so happy that you're doing it. So I have questions about what you're doing now with regards to your fourth book.
Okay.
You're working on a fourth book, and you're also giving workshops, and you're presenting. What are you doing with these workshops? Are you helping people explore consciousness, try to get an understanding of it?
Well, I've been doing workshops and doing courses now for, I don't know. I guess my first one was probably 2007 or 8. And I've been doing them kind of consistently since that. And basically in the beginning, I was talking about the theory, trying to explain to people, what the logical theory was. And again, it's so that left-brainers, logical process people, could get to the same kind of understandings that the mystics get to just intuitively. But they could see the logic in it. Anyway, so that was the point. Well, after I keep telling people, one, I say, you must be skeptical. Always remain skeptical. Be skeptical of everything and everybody. And most importantly, stay skeptical of yourself. And that is important, but you also have to be open-minded. And if you stay open-minded and skeptical, you'll end up in the right place no matter what path you're on. You'll eventually get there. So that's one thing. That's one of the things I repeat often. Stay skeptical. And when I say stay skeptical, that means don't believe anything that I tell you. Don't believe it. Just hold it as a possibility, perhaps.
Right.
And then try to experience enough that you can tell whether it's right or wrong. Does it work or does it not work?
Proof is in the
you
pudding.
have to come to it yourself. And that's the point of it's not your truth unless it's your experience.
Right.
So I told people that, and eventually they came back to me and said, okay, how are we going to get this experience? I want to have the experience. I want to see this out of body, and I want a remote view. I want to do these things. How do I get that experience? And I said, oh, go read the internet, da-da-da-da-da. And they came back and says, no, that's not doing it. Teach us. So I started doing programs besides just going out and telling what my model was all about. I started doing programs where I taught them how to develop their intuitive side, how to get out of body, how to heal, how to talk to people, both dead or not dead, connection with the larger consciousness system, telepathy, all those sorts of things. They all work in the intuitive space.
Are you working with altered states of consciousness then?
Yeah. Well, what I would do then is I'd give them a lecture about how all the theory worked, and then the next day we'd do the practice.
I see. Yeah.
You see, so it used
helps
to work,
integrate it. Right.
Yeah, it used to work like that.
Right.
And then I would have them heal. I'd have them remote view. I'd have them do all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And I'd give them instructions about how to approach it, things like this. But what I found after doing this hundreds of times, having thousands of people run through these training programs, is there's a subset of people, mostly techies, who just have a hard time getting there.
Sure. Yeah.
They just have a really hard time. And some of these guys, I have a particular group of people in Germany that they've probably been to a dozen of my events. They keep coming back and coming back and coming back. And every once in a while, one of them will suddenly get it and, and go off. Right. But they just keep coming back. And I felt really sorry for them because they're trying so hard, which of course is the problem.
Right. Right.
Trying is an intellectual effort.
Right.
You can't get there through your intellect. Right. That's not the path. Your consciousness has two different ways of processing information. One's on the intellectual side, and its tool is logic. The other one is on the intuitive side, and its tool is beyond logic.
Right.
There's no logic to it. It's not rational.
Right.
But if you develop that intuitive side, you can find that it's just as accurate and just as reliable, actually more reliable and more accurate than that intellectual side.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I didn't want to have to correct you.
So, and most people, once they develop both, they find they live their life out of their intuitive side, and they use their intellectual side to solve problems,
right?
To help gain perspective.
In the same way that you did with the computer code.
Yeah, to integrate history into their choices,
right, exactly.
That kind of stuff. So the two of them have to work together.
Right.
But once you develop your intuitive side, that's the main space you live in.
Right.
Because that's where most of the information is. That's where most of your decision space makes sense there. The logical side, logic is a wonderful tool, but it's limited by the amount of information you have. So all your big decisions, should I marry Sally or should I marry Sue? Well, you'll never get a logical answer to that question. There is no logical answer because you don't have a crystal ball that'll tell you how any of that's going to work out. There's not enough information to come up with a deductive solution to that quandary.
That information may lie in the Akashic records, however.
Yes, however, if you have that intuitive
and you can play
side,
the little variable game that you were doing before.
Yeah. So yes, so if you want to, if you go to the intuitive side, you'll be much better.
Right.
So that's why the big important questions in your life: do I take this job or that job? Should I quit this job because of this?
Right.
What should I do? All of those things, you do much better working those from the intuitive side, because the intellectual side, as powerful as logic is, it requires information or it's not logical.
That's right.
And you mostly don't have that information. Now, Where did I leave my car keys? All right, use your intellectual side. Say, oh, where was I last when I got out of the car? And try to be logical about it. But you can also use your intuitive side on those car keys too. So you use both.
Unless,
and
of course, you were really drunk when you lost your car keys, then you have to get drunk again in order to invoke state-dependent memory, right, as to where you left your car keys. I'm sorry, I cut you off there making a joke. But yeah, I get it. The difference between the logical and intuitive side are the battle of the heart and mind. It's the difference of, the way men process information, women process information. These are all, archetypes and metaphors for what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's heart and mind.
Right, sure.
Mind's intellect, the heart is intuitive.
Sure,
but
right.
Basically, they're just two ways of processing information.
Right.
The information that's available to us, so we look at all that information and we can then process it intuitively,
right,
which is beyond rational, and we can do it rationally with logic, which is limited, but still very useful. So you need both. And eventually, if you have both of them well developed, they work together as a team. The stuff that needs logic,
right,
the intellect does. The stuff that needs data and more information,
sure,
the intuitive side does. And they just hand these problems off back and forth, and they work as a great team.
They do.
But if you don't have them equally developed, so to speak, if they're not both developed to about the same degree, one of them tends to bully the other.
Developed and balanced, wouldn't you say? Developed and balanced.
Yeah, developed and balanced. Yeah, it should be developed and balanced. So in our culture, the intellectual side and the rational side is developed from beginning. From kindergarten on, we're honing and developing and learning more things and facts, and all of that stuff's up in our intellectual side. In the intuitive side, we're not even as good at being intuitive as we were when we were 2 years old.
Right.
We were better at being intuitive at 2 than we are now.
Yeah.
We've regressed for lack of use over most of our lives. So I started these courses to help people open up their intuitive side to firsthand experience remote viewing and healing and telepathy,
right,
to talk to and we did this all evidential stuff, just like we did at the lab. It all has to be evidential.
Right.
So you're going to make a connection, like a guy was there and he made a connection with his daughter, and he saw that his daughter was wearing a purple dress. And he says, that's impossible. My daughter doesn't have a purple dress. So he calls up his phone and says, Dad, I just got a new dress.
Yeah, dress shopping, right.
So that sort of thing. So that's verification. And this happened to most of the people in these courses would get this verification, and then they'd have at least a little bit of understanding how to develop it with more practice. So I just gave them the tools they needed to be able to do the rest on their own. So that was those. I didn't call those workshops, but I called those intensives. And basically it would be 4 to 5 days from 8 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock at night on this subject. So it was very intensive because people learn better.
Right.
When intuition does better in an intensive space like that, where you just get in it and you stay in it rather than jumping out and getting intellectual and so on. So anyway, I'd do these, and I felt real sorry for this particular bunch of German guys who had tried so hard and have put so much resource into it, and they just want to do it so badly, but they can't get across that boundary. So I developed a new tool for them, but it also works just as well for experts. It works great for them too. And I called it Tom's Park. Sounds a little like Bob's Park, doesn't it? But it was Tom's Park. And maybe being aware of Bob's Park helped me come up with that. But it is a park. And basically, it's a very short book. It's only 60 pages. And it's an expensive book. It's like $80. But for a training course, it's really cheap because most training courses, cost $1,000 to $3,000.
Sure.
So this is a training course that you iteratively apply over and over again. And as you change and grow, it changes and grows to match you, basically. So that if you come in as an expert, you'll find lots of things there to challenge you. You come out as a beginner, know nothing, you'll find it's just the perfect place for you to connect. So it adjusts what you understand out of it Depends on where you are.
I see. It's got a lot of depth and a lot of layers is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's got a lot of depth and a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, if it was made to help the left brain logical process guys, and I say guys because mostly they're guys, to help them get into the out-of-body state. Mm-hmm. Now, in my model, out-of-body is basically a single-player game. Mm-hmm. It's you and the larger conscious system giving you a data stream. Right. Remember, all reality is virtual reality. There's only one thing that's fundamental, and that's consciousness. Mm-hmm. In any reality frame in which you can have experience, then that's a virtual reality.
Right.
Virtual because the experience requires context. It requires rules. If there's no rules, there's really no experience. Mm-hmm. So it's a virtual reality. So all realities are virtual realities, except one, which is fundamental, and that's consciousness itself.
Right.
So if you can have an experience, then you're in a virtual reality. So all these virtual realities are data streams sent to you by the larger conscious system. You get the data, you interpret it. Mm-hmm. Now, how you interpret it is largely dependent on you.
Right.
What's in your mind? What do you know? What are your fears, your beliefs, your attitudes? What's your life experience? Mm-hmm. What's your knowledge base? What's your ignorance base? So you interpret the data however you do and interact with it however you do. So that's personal. Mm-hmm. So you're getting a data stream from the larger conscious system, and this is an out of body. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason it's called out of body is because you're no longer in this virtual reality. You're in some other virtual reality. Mm-hmm. You're in a different reality frame. Mm-hmm. And yes, that reality frame can have lots and lots of players in it, but for the most part, they're all NPCs. And for the most part, what you get from this data stream are things that will help you grow and help you evolve. It's stuff that is on your path to growing up. Mm-hmm. That's why the system plays it, because that's part of what it does. It helps people, lower their entropy, because as we lower our entropy, the whole system entropy goes down because we're part of the system.
Right.
So that's why it made the virtual reality for us. You see, it's all just what consciousness does. It evolves. And that's its primary thing.
That's right.
Just like our primary thing in the physical world is what? Survival and procreation. That's what drives us. Well, consciousness is driven by lowering its entropy. Mm-hmm. That's how it evolves. So anyway, I created this Tom's Park so that you start with just your imagination. Mm-hmm. Now, Tom's Park has lots of park-like things in it. It has a beach, it has a waterfront, it has boats that you can get, canoes and rowboats and kayaks and all of that. There's a place to snorkel. There's a sunken ship out in the deep part of the lake. It's on a big lake. You can swim. It's got jet skis. You can rent a jet ski course to drive around. Competitive for times and
5-star accommodations.
It's got a lodge of 5-star accommodations.
I'm there.
It's got restaurants, several restaurants. It's got informal restaurants and very formal restaurants. Okay. It's got lounges. It's got meeting halls. It's got alcoves in which you can have private conversations, and it has lots of interesting things. In this lodge, there's a fear clinic where you can go work on fears. Mm-hmm. There's a health clinic where you can work on any kind of healing issues. There's a library where you can download those things you'd like to understand, but don't. Mm-hmm. It doesn't download into your intellect. It downloads into your intuition. So you get understanding at an intuitive level, mm-hmm. not at an intellectual level. Mm-hmm. There's a travel agency with about 10 or 15 canned trips you can take. You can go visit a spaceship. You can go to some other world or planet. You can go forward and backward in time. It's a whole list of places you can go. Now, these are just canned trips. You get in and you take that particular trip. And I have another place called the Hexagon Room. It's up on the second floor, and it has has 6 rooms. One of them's dedicated to out of body. One's dedicated to healing. One's dedicated to remote viewing. One's dedicated to communications. Let's see, what am I missing?
Are you working
Anyway,
on the video? Are you working on the video
thing.
game of this?
Actually, somebody is.
I can only, I'm visualizing it as you speak.
Actually,
so
somebody is. And the last one, the sixth one, is a help desk.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go there to get questions answered, to help doing anything within the park or outside the park or with your life or anything else. With the help desk there. And it's got lots of staff. And you can interact with the staff. The staff is there to make your park visits as useful and functional as possible.
Are there non-physical friends Are there non-physical friends who are there to give you the quizzes and things that you need to learn to master?
Yeah, well, you would get those probably in an out of body. But there are lots of staff. You could, if you just want somebody to dine with, you can go there and you can get staff member just to sit down and have dinner with you, or go play a game of rugby on the rugby field, or basketball, or ice skate, or the pinball heaven down in the basement. You can bowl, you can roller skate. It's got all kinds of sports. It's got handy little booths. Like if you go to the beach, you don't have to worry about swimwear. You walk through a kiosk inside with your street clothes. You come out the other side in swimwear, and you walk back through it, and the same thing happens. Even the ladies, when they go back through it, all their hair is done just perfectly. Makeup is perfect. Everything gets put back, the way it was.
And all of this is designed to take you out of your left brain and put you into an intuitive quadrant. Yes.
So here's how it works. I have all this paranormal stuff. There's the hot springs there that's also healing. There's a lily pond there that is very spiritual. It's a vortex that got all these things there. Right. But the way it works is that as a beginner, you stay pretty much with the physical things. Okay. You start with your imagination. So you get your jet ski, you go snorkeling, you walk around. There's like a 2 or 3, about a 4-mile walk around the lake. You can get a bicycle and you can ride it. It's full of animals. It's full of staff members. The animals mostly talk, so you can have conversations. You can go horseback riding. So all of these things are what I call the physical sorts of things. And, of course, if you go horseback riding, you don't have to know the trails, because you can talk to your horse and your horse knows the trails. This place is entirely safe. There's no way you can get hurt here. Nothing stings, nothing itches, nothing will cause a welt on you. You cannot drown in the lake. If you jump off a cliff, you'll just float to the bottom. So it's a completely safe space. And I let people know that if anything negative happens to you, it's because you brought that negativity there.
And you will be immediately ejected from the park.
No, you're just aware that you brought the negativity there. It's yours. That's why it's there. There is no negativity there. So the idea is you start with your imagination, and you do these things, horseback riding, whatever, and you try to engage as many of your senses as possible. There's a snack stand right down by the beach, and you can get an ice cream. You can get snacks, you can get a pizza, but you have to taste it. And when you get in the water, you feel the water, you feel its temperature, you feel its slishing, and it comes and goes. You feel the little wavelets. You smell the vegetation that's rotting, as you walk around it, because lakes always have rotting vegetation around in the shallow parts.
Sure.
So it has to be all dimensions, all of your sense dimensions are engaged. So you just practice imagining that a day in the park, talking to staff, talking to other people who are there, talking to the animals, taking a hike. There's lots and lots of trails that go up in the mountains. There's mountains in this park. And you can hike up there. There's waterfalls, there's caverns, there's all sorts of things to find up there. So you stay with the physical things until you get to the point that your daydream just kind of goes on by itself. The daydream just starts to roll on without you actively having to play it. You don't have to actively decide, this is a cave. I will go inside and there will be stalagmites and stalactites and I will look at them and be amazed. You don't do that. It just happens. So what you practice just with an imagination until that daydream that you're in begins to have a life of its own, right? Runs on its own. And most people experience that. Most people have had daydreams, and in those daydreams, stuff just kind of goes on by itself. You start out playing both parts.
Carl
I'm talking
Jung
to
wrote
Susie
about
in my
that.
daydream, and in the beginning, I'm playing my part and Susie's part, but eventually it just unravels the way it does. So when you get to that point, you see, now you're ready. Now you are out of the intellect into the intuitive side. Mm-hmm. But this is not a now I'm here and now I'm there, this big 1-0 transition. Because you can have 10% of it is your 90% of it's your imagination, and 10% of it is coming from elsewhere.
Right.
Well, where is that elsewhere when it just unravels on its own?
Right.
That's a data stream. That's coming from the larger consciousness system. Mm-hmm. The system is working with me here, and it's going to support anybody's daydream. It'll pick right up and be a part of that daydream seamlessly. So you could be a 10-90 or a 50-50, and wherever that line is, it can come and go. So you can be mostly you're making it up and just a little bit's happening by itself, or mostly it's happening by itself and you're just making up little bits of it. And that line it's fluid. It can change in and out, come and go, however it does.
Right.
So now we have the continuous line. We don't have a jolt. Am I out of body yet? No, that's my physical arm, and you do these things. No, I'm not there, because it's a 1 or a 0. You're either there or you're not there. Mm-hmm. And it happens instantly. There's no graceful period. And that intellect is sitting there waiting for that transition. And the transition never happens because the intellect can't let go and just let it happen in the intuitive side.
Yeah.
So now it's totally invisible. There is no jump. You're just having a daydream, and that daydream gets more or less real depending on whether you relaxed and let your intuition go, or whether you're trying to control it and make it do a certain thing. So with practice, you get better and better at it, because let's say you go in the park and you get on the jet skis and you do it and you do it. And now this is the 50th time you've gone there and got on the jet skis. Well, now you're kind of bored with it because you've been over that. And when you're bored with it, what happens? You stop controlling it. Your intellect sits down and reads a book because it's bored.
Right.
And then the consciousness system starts sending you the data dream, and off you go. Mm-hmm. So even if you're terrible at it and you have a very poor imagination, you work on it, and you work on the taste, the smell, the feel, and you keep doing it until you get to a point where you're getting that data stream to the point that you can't tell where it's coming from. It's just coming. And at that point, you're out of body. You're no longer here. Mm-hmm. That's an out of body. An out of body is a single player game with the larger consciousness system. Now, what is that out of body going to do? Well, it depends. You have intent. You can say, I want to go see what's going on at home. I want to go see what happened to my grandparents. I want to go to the backside of the moon and see if there's anything there. You can do what you want. Or I want to talk with my dead Uncle Fred, or, you have volition in this, because you and the larger consciousness system are now in a game, and it'll vary that game based on what you want and what you need. What do you need to see or experience to help you grow?
Right.
You see, or to help you get over fears. Mm-hmm. It maybe we'll give you some fear tests or whatever. But anyway, so the system will work with you. And that's automatic and out of body, but you don't really know where the beginning or end is. And that makes it so that it's not a big slam, and the intellect can't sit up there and watch it happen. It just eventually you'll get bored. If you keep playing all sides. You'll just get tired of it. But if you keep doing it, that's when you'll start to succeed. Mm-hmm. So if a person really applies themselves to it and keeps doing it iteratively, they will succeed. They'll end up out of body, I think, almost certainly, because they'll get bored with it and they will let go. And as soon as they do, they won't know that it's not them. Mm-hmm. When you're daydreaming and it's suddenly not you anymore, there's no spot where a sound goes off or a bell rings or something flashes. It's such a subtle transition there that mostly you don't even notice it until it's over. And then it's, wow, gee, I thought up all that. Where'd that come from? Right. And then you're kind of aware. But until then, it's really subtle. So it's going to give these people a way to get that single player game. And it's all out of bodies are basically that. Now, let's say you're a young man and you're in your 20s. maybe even in your 30s still. And what you do is you go out of body and you fight monsters. You're a big kung fu guy and you have your lightsaber and you go out and you fight monsters to save the world and so on. And that's, the forces of evil against, you're part of the forces of good. That's because in your mind, you're still in that mode of, warlord mentality, fighting evil with your sword. That's the mindset you're in, because that's typical male mindset. It's part of our instincts. That's the way we are. It's how we develop. So you do a lot of that stuff, and eventually you outgrow that, and you don't have that anymore. It just disappears and goes away because you outgrow the need for interacting at that level of dealing with things with violence. Mm-hmm. Setting up those situations where it's a situation where violence is necessary, and you set those up just because that's the way that your instincts tell you to deal with things. But the system will work with you with that. They'll keep giving you all the monsters you need to, to duel with and everything, and give you just what you need. And all the while, you're learning to focus your intent, stay in the intuitive side. You're learning to strategize while you're there. You're learning to use your intent to modify the outcome of events. So you're learning all these really useful skills, even though you're playing, chop games in your mind because you're immature. And that's what males do when they're immature. They fight. So, but you're still learning, and the system will give you what you need to learn, and it'll coax you along a little bit to try this and try that. And pretty soon you'll be talking people into being nice rather than having to use your lightsaber. And then you graduate to realizing that everybody's actually okay just the way they are, and you don't have to fight them at all. And so the system will work with you basically to give you the things that help you understand, open your mind up, and develop your intuitive side. So it's all positive, even though it may seem like, well, all I did was, something nonsensical. You're still learning. You're still growing. There's still things that you're taking away from that are valuable. So the larger conscious system agreed to play in Tom's Park with me and all the visitors that come there, so that they will immediately be hooked up with data streams. How much they process it or not is up to them, but that's that invisible boundary, you see. They can let it go and get more, or shut it off and do more of their own, and the system will basically play with them until they just let it go, and it goes on, and they don't even know that they are out of body. They just know they had this really strange adventure and met all these interesting people and learned all these interesting things. You see? Well, so that's the idea, because I just define out of body as when you're no longer here. If you are not processing your sense data, you're not, quote, in your body. Of course, you never were in your body in the first place. There's nothing in your body. Your body's just a calculation and some eye candy, so you can see what's going on. You are consciousness.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
For the eye candy compliment.
Yeah, that's
the listeners at home don't know how good looking we both are. They also don't know that I'm sitting here nodding my head, because I'm just letting you describe your book. First of all, I want you to say I totally get where you're coming from, and I think you get the Carl Jung seal of approval in this work. I'm a big fan. Yeah. I've read the Red Book about 100 million times, and I know that the potency of what you're talking about. I love the idea of making the transition point from left brain to right brain, from physical matter consciousness to non-physical matter consciousness, a more smooth. And because you're right about arousal levels, and we could talk about that for about 6.5 hours, but I'm well aware that we've been at it now for 3 hours, and I'm going to have to make two parts for this interview. I love where you're going with this, and I just think that you're a brilliant guy. You're a fascinating guy with a great message. I wish more people of your ilk would one day just help us understand, us as a species, understand something much deeper about ourselves and our potential. Because I think the conversation between mysticism, psychology, psychospiritual work, and the hard sciences, neurology, neurochemistry, physics, all can find common ground if we have this conversation together and start to realize, hey, there are commonalities in what we're talking about. I compared you earlier in what you were talking about to something that, has been with the mystics, and propagated from the mystics for centuries. But couched in that poetic, flowery language, it's not something that appeals to the scientists. What you're doing and with your background does appeal to the science. People like you, Dean Radin at, IONS, etc. All these wonderful scientists I have the opportunity to speak with, I can understand what you're saying and at the same time understand what the energy healers saying, because I speak that language as well. People like you and Bob Monroe, you brought a new facet to the conversation, and you have my appreciation for it. I know you have the appreciation of a lot of other people. I also, couldn't thank you more for your time today.
You're quite welcome, Mark. It's been fun. I hope that your listeners find value in our conversations. I hope they will. I expect many will.
I'm hopeful that he was correct. I hope you're enjoying this. The conversation did not end at this point. Tom and I were having so much fun that after a quick pee break, we went on for an additional hour and a half, and we even included listeners' questions gathered from social media, something we intend to continue to do in the future. I hope you'll tune in for that in the next episode of my interview with Tom Campbell. Until next time, may peace and love guide your steps through whatever reality you're creating.
Be certain to tune in again to Expanding on Consciousness to become informed on the fascinating field of consciousness studies and its applications. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the guests and the host. They do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Monroe Institute. Expanding on Consciousness is underwritten and produced by the Monroe Institute, copyright 2022, and is broadcast by permission. Reproduction or redistribution without the express written consent of Monroe Institute is prohibited by law. For more information about Expanding on Consciousness, visit our website at monroeinstitute.org or connect with us on the socials. Thank you for listening.